Have you ever been humiliated in front of an entire boardroom by someone who's never accomplished a single thing just because they're the CEO's nephew? I stood there once, hands trembling, blood rushing to my ears, while his laughter echoed through the glass-walled conference room. They thought I'd stay silent. They didn't know I'd planted a $79 million technical bomb right under their feet, and with one click, his entire reputation, contracts, and career would collapse overnight. My name is Ava Mercer, and until 3 weeks ago, I was the invisible backbone of Blue Wave Technologies, the one who kept their $70 million infrastructure from imploding while executives played golf and talked about synergy. 34 years old, MIT graduate, 12 years of building systems that processed billions in transactions without a single critical failure. My code was poetry written in logic gates and security protocols, but to them, I was just employee number 4782, another name on the org chart, another resource to be optimized. The morning it happened started like any other. 7:30 a.m. sharp. I was already 3 espressos deep, reviewing deployment logs in the war room, what we called the windowless dungeon where real work happened. My fingers danced across 3 monitors, checking latency reports, security patches, load balancers. Everything hummed perfectly, as it always did under my watch. Then the Slack notification popped up. All hands architecture review, conference room atlas, 9 a.m., mandatory. I should have known something was wrong when I walked in and saw the setup. 23 executives arranged like a tribunal. The Japanese investors from Tokuma Holdings sat rigid in their charcoal suits. Our CTO, Marcus Webb, avoided eye contact, and there, at the head of the table, lounging in the CEO's chair like he'd earned it, was Ethan Callaway. 27 years old, Wharton MBA that Daddy paid for, 3 months at the company, 0 commits to the codebase, but he had something I didn't, the right last name and his uncle's ear. "Ava!" Ethan's voice boomed across the room, performative enthusiasm dripping from every syllable. "So glad you could join us. I was just explaining to our partners about the inefficiencies in our current architecture." Inefficiencies, my architecture, the one that had maintained 99.99% uptime for 3 consecutive years. He clicked to the next slide. My code, my diagrams, covered in red circles and condescending annotations. As you can see, this legacy approach, what I call graveyard programming, is holding us back from true innovation. Legacy, I'd refactored that entire module 6 months ago using the latest frameworks. Perhaps, Ethan continued, his eyes finding mine with surgical precision, if we had engineers who understood modern paradigms instead of clinging to their comfort zones like parasites feeding off company resources. The room went silent. The Japanese investors shifted uncomfortably. Someone's coffee cup clinked against a saucer. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steady despite the volcanic rage building in my chest. "Are you referring to the architecture that just passed Pentagon-level security audits?" Ethan laughed, that specific laugh reserved for people who've never faced real consequences. "See, this is exactly the kind of dinosaur thinking I'm talking about. Security audits? We need disruption, not paperwork, speed, not bureaucracy. Maybe if you spent less time hiding in your cave writing your little scripts and more time understanding business strategy." He turned to the Tokuma representatives. "This is why we're hemorrhaging opportunities. Dead-weight engineers who think elegant code matters more than market velocity." Mr. Yamamoto, the lead investor, frowned. "Callaway-san, we were under the impression Blue Wave's technical infrastructure was industry-leading." "It was," Ethan interrupted, "until it became a monument to mediocrity maintained by people who mistake job security for job performance." That's when he delivered the killing blow, looking directly at me. "Ava here is the perfect example. A fossil collecting a paycheck while real innovators are forced to work around her tangled mess of spaghetti code." Spaghetti code. My code that had 0 technical debt. My code that junior developers used as reference material. Mr. Yamamoto stood up. "We need to reconsider our position. The $79 million deal. 3 years of negotiations, gone. As the Tokuma delegation filed out, Ethan shrugged. Good riddance. We don't need investors who can't see the future. Marcus finally spoke. Ethan, that was completely necessary. Ethan cut him off. Sometimes you need to burn the old to build the new. I stood there, surrounded by 23 cowards who wouldn't meet my eyes, feeling the weight of public humiliation settle on my shoulders like a lead blanket. But underneath the shame, something else stirred, something cold and calculating. Ethan had no idea that every critical function in Blue Wave's infrastructure had my fingerprints on it. He didn't know about the compliance protocols I'd built, the dependencies I'd mapped, the kill switches I'd documented but never advertised. He thought he'd won. He thought I was nothing. He was about to learn that when you humiliate someone who controls the very ground you stand on, you better make sure they don't know where the fault lines are. Ethan Calloway was everything wrong with corporate America wrapped in a Tom Ford suit and doused in Creed Aventus cologne. I started studying him the way a biologist studies a virus, methodically, dispassionately, looking for weaknesses in his protein shell of privilege. He'd arrive every morning at 9:45 a.m., never 9. That was for peasants. Rolling up in his leased Porsche Taycan, the one with the custom plate reading DSRUPTR. His morning routine was performance art, the dramatic entrance through the lobby, the calculated pause at the security desk to chat with guards whose names he never remembered, the swagger toward the executive elevator while typing furiously on his phone about absolutely nothing. I watched from my desk as he held court in the open office, spouting TED Talk wisdom he'd absorbed through osmosis. We need to embrace radical candor, he'd announce, having never read Kim Scott's book. Let's leverage our core competencies for maximum synergy. Word salad dressed in confidence sauce. His LinkedIn was a masterclass in manufactured success. Thought leader, innovation catalyst, disruption architect. Every post started with, I was humbled today when, followed by transparent self-promotion. He had 40,000 followers, 39,000 bought from a click farm in Bangladesh. But who was counting? The tools he wielded were all surface, no substance. Slack became his megaphone for buzzword bingo. Let's huddle on this. We need to pivot. Time to scale our learnings. He'd create 17 Trello boards for projects he'd abandon within days. His Zoom backgrounds were carefully curated, sometimes a bookshelf filled with business books he'd never opened, sometimes a view of Manhattan he'd screenshot from Google Images. But what fascinated me most was his complete ignorance of how anything actually worked. He'd demand quick wins that required rewiring entire databases. He'd promise clients features that violated basic laws of computing. Once, I heard him tell a vendor we could blockchain the cloud infrastructure for maximum AI optimization. Even the vendor looked confused. He treated the engineering team like janitors, necessary evils who existed to manifest his visions into reality. He'd skip security briefings because that's what we pay the nerds for. He ignored compliance training, claiming regulations are just suggestions for people without vision. Every email from legal went straight to trash. Every warning about technical debt was dismissed as perfectionism paralysis. I documented everything, every dismissive comment, every skipped protocol, every time he overrode a security measure to make a deadline. Screenshots, timestamps, email trails. I collected them like evidence at a crime scene. The most telling moment came during a product demo. A client asked about our disaster recovery protocols. Ethan laughed, that same dismissive laugh from the boardroom, and said, Disaster recovery is for companies that expect to fail. We're built different. Built different. We were built on architecture I'd designed, systems I'd secured, code I'd optimized. He was standing on a platform I'd constructed, claiming he'd learned to fly. His uncle, CEO William Calloway, enabled every delusion. In William's eyes, Ethan was the future, a digital native who understood the new economy. Never mind that Ethan thought GitHub was a social media platform and believed Python was just a programming language for beginners. I learned Ethan's patterns. He'd take credit for wins in public channels but bury failures in private messages. He'd schedule meetings at 4:30 p.m. on Fridays to minimize attendance, then claim unanimous approval for his ideas. He'd forward emails selectively, removing context that made him look bad. But his fatal flaw was his absolute certainty that people like me didn't matter. To him, I was background noise, a name on spreadsheets, a cost center to be optimized away once he found some offshore replacement or AI tool to do my job. He never bothered to learn what I actually did, never understood that every API call, every database query, every line of code that kept Blue Wave running had dependencies he couldn't see. He lived in PowerPoint and Excel, while I lived in the actual machinery that made his presentations possible. 3 days after the boardroom humiliation, I overheard him on a call. "Yeah, I'm cleaning house, starting with the Deadwood developers. That Ava situation? Handled it. She'll probably quit within a month. These technical types can't handle real corporate pressure." Technical types, as if understanding technology in a technology company was somehow beneath him. That night, I stayed late. Not unusual for me. But instead of debugging code, I was mapping dependencies. Every system Ethan had touched, every shortcut he'd taken, every compliance violation he'd committed in his rush to move fast and break things. He wanted to break things? I'd show him what broken really looked like. The funny thing about entitled men like Ethan is they never imagine the help might be listening. They never consider that the people they step on might be taking notes. They never suspect that someone they've dismissed as irrelevant might be the one holding all the keys. He thought I was nobody. He was about to learn that nobody had been keeping receipts. 6 months before Ethan Calloway ever darkened Blue Wave's doorway. I'd built something beautiful, not just code, a fortress of logic so elegant, so intrinsically woven into our infrastructure, that removing it would be like trying to extract your nervous system while keeping your body alive. It started innocently enough. The company needed a new security layer for our core transaction processing system, something that could handle regulatory compliance while maintaining microsecond response times. I spent 3 months architecting it, another 2 implementing it, 5 months of 16-hour days, weekends dissolved into flowcharts, dreams invaded by recursive functions. But I was smart about it, paranoid, maybe, after watching 3 colleagues get laid off right after finishing major projects. So I built in something special, a proprietary authentication protocol that I registered with our legal department as IP-sensitive intellectual property, patent pending, technically, my name on every document. The beauty was in the simplicity. Every deployment to production required cryptographic signatures derived from the original source logic, my logic. Without the proper authentication chain, the system would operate normally for exactly 72 hours. Then it would start throwing warnings. After 96 hours, it would lock down non-critical functions. After 1 week, full system paralysis. I called it the compliance hook in the documentation, sold it to legal as a safeguard against unauthorized code injection. They loved it. It made us unhackable from the outside. What I didn't advertise was that it also made us unhackable from the inside. If someone tried to bypass the original architect's authority, the kill switch wasn't malicious, it was protective, like a biometric lock that only recognized its creator's fingerprints. Completely legal, completely documented, completely invisible unless you knew where to look. And Ethan? Ethan never looked at documentation. Documentation was for process-obsessed middle managers, as he'd loudly proclaimed during his 2nd week. I watched him systematically dismantle every safety rail I'd built. Quality assurance protocols? Too slow. Code review requirements? Bureaucratic bottlenecks. The mandatory 48-hour testing period before production deployment? Analysis paralysis. He created a new fast-track innovation pipeline, basically a backdoor that bypassed every security measure to push updates directly to production. He bragged about it in all-hands meetings, called it entrepreneurial thinking inside enterprise architecture. The first time he used it, I got an automated alert. Unauthorized deployment attempted. Signature verification failed. I could have stopped it then, Could have raised the alarm, but I wanted to see how far he'd go. He started making promises to the board. We'll cut deployment time by 80%. New features weekly instead of monthly. We'll be the fastest-moving enterprise tech company in the sector. To deliver on these impossible promises, he had his hand-picked team of boot camp graduates, kids who didn't know enough to question him, stripping out what he called redundant security features. They removed logging mechanisms because they slowed down the system. They disabled backup protocols because we're moving forward, not backward. Every violation triggered another silent alert in my monitoring system. A beautiful, horrible symphony of corporate self-destruction, all time-stamped, all logged, all traced directly back to Ethan's authorization credentials. The $79 million contract he'd scared away? That was just the opening act. Ethan had promised the board he'd recover that loss with a revolutionary new platform, Project Phoenix. He called it, rising from the ashes of outdated thinking. Project Phoenix was built entirely on my architecture, with all my security measures stripped away. It was like watching someone rebuild a Ferrari engine with duct tape and superglue, then promising it would win Formula One. He set the launch date for 3 weeks out, invited every major tech journalist, industry analyst, and potential investor. The demo would process real-time financial transactions at unprecedented speeds. Speeds only possible because he'd removed every safety check I'd built. I did the math. Project Phoenix would deploy on a Thursday at 2 p.m. The compliance hook would give him exactly 72 hours of flawless operation, just long enough for the press to write glowing reviews, for investors to wire deposits, for Ethan to take his victory lap. Then Sunday at 2 p.m., during the peak of his triumph, the first warnings would appear. By Monday morning, when the markets opened, when real money started flowing through the system, the gradual degradation would begin. By Thursday, exactly 1 week after launch, Blue Wave would be paralyzed. The beautiful irony? The solution was simple. All they needed was my signature to restore the authentication chain. But Ethan had publicly branded me as deadwood, a fossil, a parasite. How would it look when he had to come crawling to the nobody he'd humiliated to save his revolutionary platform? I updated my resume that night, not because I planned to leave, but because I wanted a record of everything I'd built at Blue Wave, every system, every protocol, every line of code that Ethan was about to destroy in his pursuit of glory. I also made copies of everything: legal documents, patent filings, architectural diagrams, and most importantly, the complete audit trail of Ethan's compliance violations, stored safely in 3 different locations, encrypted with keys only I possessed. The bomb was armed. The countdown had started. Ethan thought he was building a rocket ship. He was actually lighting a very long, very expensive fuse. The launch of Operation Phoenix was everything Ethan dreamed it would be. The main auditorium transformed into a tech evangelist's paradise. Laser lights cutting through artificial fog. Screens everywhere displaying real-time metrics. Pounding music that made you feel like you were at a SpaceX launch rather than a software demo. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan stood at center stage, his wireless mic catching every practiced inflection. Today we don't just update, we revolutionize. We don't iterate, we obliterate the competition. 200 people in the audience, TechCrunch, Wired, Forbes, venture capitalists with checkbooks ready, our entire board of directors in the front row, including Uncle William beaming with pride. The live stream showed 12,000 viewers on LinkedIn, all watching Ethan's moment of glory. Behind him, massive screens showed the Phoenix dashboard, transactions flowing like a river of green lights, response times in nanoseconds, throughput rates that shouldn't have been possible, because they weren't supposed to be, not safely. "Watch this," Ethan announced, pulling out his phone with theatrical flair. "I'm going to process 10,000 transactions, right now, live." He pressed a button. The screens erupted in activity, numbers flying, charts spiking, success rates at 100%. The audience gasped. Someone actually applauded. I sat in the back corner, laptop open, watching the real metrics, the ones Ethan's stripped-down monitoring couldn't see. In my terminal, a different story unfolded. Error 5004. Signature verification bypassed. Warning. Core logic authentication pending. Alert. Compliance protocol violation detected. Container orchestration. Unstable state masked. The system was screaming, but Ethan had removed its voice. He'd disabled the alerts, muted the warnings, buried the logs. It was like watching someone drive a car at 200 miles per hour with the check engine light covered by duct tape. "This is just the beginning," Ethan continued, swagger increasing with each successful demo. "By next quarter, every Fortune 500 company will be begging for our technology." My Slack flickered. A message from Jennifer in QA, one of the few competent people left who hadn't drunk Ethan's Kool-Aid. "Ava, are you seeing this? Prod mapping returning null values in shadow environment. Sandbox is going haywire." I typed back, "Document everything. Save local copies." Another message, this time from David in DevOps. "Container orchestrators are auto-terminating sessions every 12 minutes. We're running constant restart cycles to keep up appearances. This isn't sustainable." But on stage, on the screens, in front of the world, everything looked perfect. Ethan had specifically scheduled the demo to run for 45 minutes, just short enough that the cycled restarts wouldn't be noticeable, just long enough to impress. "Now," Ethan announced, "let me show you the crown jewel, our new instant deployment feature. Watch as I push an update to production in real time. No downtime, no delays, no excuses." He pressed another button. On the screens, a progress bar filled instantly. "Deployed!" flashed in giant green letters. The audience erupted in applause. I checked my monitoring system. The deployment had bypassed 17 security protocols, violated 3 federal compliance standards, and exposed our entire database to potential SQL injection. But it was fast. God, it was fast. During the Q&A, a journalist asked about security measures. Ethan laughed. That same dismissive laugh that haunted my dreams. "Security is built into our DNA. We don't need layers of paranoid protocols slowing us down. We've transcended traditional security through innovation." Transcended. We'd transcended security the way an airplane transcends gravity by running out of fuel. After the presentation, Ethan was swarmed by admirers. He was live streaming on LinkedIn. Hashtags flying. Hatch disruption, inaction, natch, innovation, unleashed, Phoenix rising, visionary leadership. "This is what happens," he said to his phone camera. "When you clear out the deadwood and let real innovators innovate, no more fossil engineers holding us back with their paranoid protocols and legacy thinking." The first real crack appeared 3 hours later. A minor glitch in the payment processing module. Transactions completing but not logging properly. Ethan's team scrambled to fix it, pushed a patch directly to production without testing. The patch worked, but it triggered another flag in my compliance system. By 11:30 p.m., I was home, watching the cascade beginning in slow motion, error rates creeping up from 0.01% to 0.03%. Insignificant to anyone watching the dashboard, catastrophic to anyone who understood exponential decay. Jennifer messaged again. "API endpoints are starting to time out randomly. We're getting calls from enterprise clients about intermittent failures." "Tell them it's routine maintenance," I replied. "Let Ethan handle it." She sent back a laughing emoji. Then, "He's at a celebration party, posted Instagram stories from some rooftop bar, popping champagne." Of course he was. The king celebrating his coronation, unaware that his crown was made of paper and the throne was built on sand. I pulled up the authentication system logs. 72 hours until the first public warnings. 96 until partial shutdown. 168 until complete system failure. The countdown had started the moment Ethan pushed that first unauthorized deployment. My phone buzzed, an automated alert from the compliance system. Unauthorized production deployment detected. Grace period initiated. Authentication required within 72 hours to prevent service degradation. The same alert was buried somewhere in Ethan's inbox. marked as low priority, filtered into a folder he'd never check because he'd configured his email to ignore technical noise. I closed my laptop, poured a glass of wine, and sat by my window watching the city lights. Somewhere out there, Ethan was drunk on success and champagne, surrounded by people congratulating him on his vision, his boldness, his innovation. In 72 hours, he'd wake up to a very different world. The phoenix had risen. Soon, it would remember that phoenixes are born from ashes. And sometimes, they have to burn first. Carl Henson was the kind of engineer Silicon Valley forgot to celebrate. 53 years old, gray-bearded, still writing code instead of managing people who wrote code. He'd been at Blue Wave for 15 years, survived 4 CEOs, 6 pivots, and countless revolutionary initiatives. He knew where all the bodies were buried because he'd helped dig most of the graves. Carl had been watching the Phoenix launch from his desk, not the auditorium. While everyone else watched the show, he watched the logs, and Carl, unlike Ethan, actually read logs. It started with curiosity, a simple question. How had Ethan achieved those impossible response times? Carl pulled up the system architecture, expecting to find some new optimization, some clever caching mechanism. Instead, he found absence, missing security layers, deleted validation protocols, entire modules simply gone. "What the hell?" he muttered, diving deeper. He traced through the Git history, following the trail of commits, each one attributed to Ethan or his hand-picked team, each one removing another piece of my original architecture. It was like watching someone perform surgery with a chainsaw. But something else bothered Carl. The system was still running, badly, yes, but running. That meant the core logic was intact, just exposed, naked, like someone had taken a tank and removed all the armor plating to make it faster. He needed the original documentation, the real blueprints, not the sanitized versions Ethan had been showing investors. Carl knew where to look. The old filing cabinet in the abandoned corner of the 3rd floor, where Blue Wave stored physical copies of critical documentation for legal compliance. Nobody went there anymore. Everything was digital now, everything except the legally binding originals. At 2:15 a.m. on Saturday, Carl stood in that dusty corner with a flashlight, pulling binders from 2024. He found it in the 3rd cabinet, a pristine black binder labeled Core Transaction Processing Architecture v3.0, property of Blue Wave Technologies, architect Ava Mercer. 76 pages of pristine documentation, flowcharts that looked like art, logic sequences that were poetry and Boolean. And there, flagged with legal tabs, section after section marked patent pending and intellectual property protection. Carl flipped to Appendix C, Compliance and Authentication Protocols. His flashlight trembled as he read. Any modification to the core logic requires authenticated signature from the original architect. Unauthorized deployments will trigger graduated system protection, beginning with warnings at 72 hours, progressing to full system lock at 168 hours. This protection is legally binding under IP Contract 2024 BW 0847, signed by Chief Legal Officer Diana Reed. He photographed every page with his phone. Then he went back to his desk and did what Carl did best. He investigated. Cross-referencing the current production code with Ava's original architecture was like comparing a Monet with a child's finger painting. Ethan hadn't just modified the system, he'd butchered it. But the bones were still there, still Ava's, still protected by that authentication protocol. Carl found the contract in the legal database, Diana Reed's digital signature glowing at the bottom, ironclad. Any unauthorized use of Ava's architecture would constitute IP theft, with personal liability extending to whoever authorized the deployment. He checked the deployment logs, every single one signed with Ethan's credentials, his digital fingerprints all over the crime scene. At 9 a.m. Monday morning, Carl knocked on Diana Reed's door. Diana was old-school legal, the kind who actually read contracts instead of just rubber stamping them. She listened to Carl's explanation, examined his evidence, her expression growing graver with each page. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that Ethan deployed proprietary, IP-protected code to production without the architect's authorization?" 73 times in the last week alone, Carl confirmed, showing her the logs. Diana pulled up the compliance system on her computer. There it was, buried in a folder marked low priority. Dozens of authentication warnings, all ignored, all traceable to Ethan. "This is," Diana paused, choosing her words carefully, "catastrophic. If this authentication fails, if the system locks, we're not just facing downtime, we're facing lawsuits, regulatory violations. The SEC could—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. "The $79 million contract with Tokuma Holdings," Carl added quietly, "the one we lost? They could claim we negotiated in bad faith if our entire system is built on violated IP." Diana's face went white. She picked up her phone, then put it down. "I need to verify this independently. If what you're showing me is accurate—" "It is," Carl said. "Every timestamp, every log entry, every line of code, it's all there." Diana stood up. "Don't discuss this with anyone, not even Marcus. I need to convene an emergency legal review. If Ethan really did this—" "He did," Carl said. "And Diana? The first authentication warning was 70 hours ago. We have less than 2 days before the system starts degrading." Diana's hands were already reaching for her phone. "Get me everything. Every document, every log, every piece of evidence. And Carl, find out if Ava Mercer is still reachable." Carl smiled grimly. "Oh, I have a feeling she's been waiting for this call." As he left Diana's office, Carl passed Ethan in the hallway. Surrounded by his usual entourage of sycophants, Ethan was loudly explaining how he'd revolutionized enterprise deployment. Carl said nothing, but he made sure to make eye contact, to hold it just a second too long, long enough for Ethan's smile to flicker, for a shadow of doubt to cross his face. The investigation had begun. The fuse was burning faster now. And Carl Henson, the forgotten engineer, the gray-beard who still read documentation, had just lit a match under Ethan's $79 million house of cards. The fire drill wasn't scheduled. That should have been Ethan's first clue. At 11:45 a.m. on Tuesday, the alarm shrieked through Blue Wave's offices, sending 200 employees shuffling toward the exits with practiced annoyance. "Seriously?" Ethan complained to his entourage as they filed down the stairs. "We have the Phoenix momentum going and they pull this bureaucratic BS?" I watched from across the courtyard as people gathered in their designated assembly areas, but something was off. Carl Henson wasn't with his usual group. He was standing by the executive assembly point, right next to my old desk visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 3rd floor. Diana Reed stood beside him, so did Marcus Webb, our CTO, and James Morrison from the board. They weren't evacuating. They were waiting. "Is this everyone?" the fire marshal called out, going through his clipboard with theatrical thoroughness. "Building clear for inspection. Should be about 15 minutes. Ethan was already on his phone, live streaming the inconvenience to his LinkedIn followers. "Even fire drills can't stop innovation," he laughed to his camera. "Phoenix stays burning no matter what." That's when I saw it happen through the windows. Carl reached into his messenger bag and pulled out the black binder. Even from across the courtyard, I could see the gold lettering on the spine. He placed it on my old desk, the desk Ethan had ceremoniously cleared out after humiliating me, the desk he'd turned into a monument to his triumph over legacy thinking. The binder sat there like an accusation, alone, spotlit by the afternoon sun. "All right, everyone back inside," the fire marshal announced. "All clear." The crowd moved like a tide, Ethan still talking to his phone, still surrounded by his admirers. They flowed back through the lobby, up the stairs, toward their desks. Ethan's route would take him directly past my old desk. I positioned myself in the stairwell with a clear view through the glass doors. This was Carl's show now, but I wasn't going to miss it. Ethan rounded the corner, still mid-sentence about disruption through adversity, when he stopped dead, His entourage bumped into him like dominoes. The binder sat there, impossible to ignore. Carl stood 10 feet away, silent. Diana beside him, Marcus, James, a tableau of judgment. "What's this?" Ethan asked, his voice carrying that forced casualness of someone who knows they're in trouble but hasn't figured out why yet. Nobody answered. Ethan stepped forward, picked up the binder, opened it. I watched his face change as he read the cover page. The architect's name, the patent pending stamps, the legal authorization signatures. "This is," he started to say, then stopped. His audience had grown. People pretending to work at nearby desks, others finding reasons to walk past slowly, the entire floor holding its breath. Carl finally spoke, his voice carrying in the silence. "That's the original architecture documentation for the system you deployed last week, the one you called Legacy Spaghetti Code." Ethan's laugh came out wrong, pitched too high. "Carl, buddy, this is ancient history. We've moved beyond—" "Page 47, Diana interrupted. "The authentication protocol, the one you bypassed 73 times. Ethan flipped to the page, his hands not quite steady. More people had gathered now. Jennifer from QA, David from DevOps, the entire Phoenix team watching their leader read his own indictment. "I don't understand," Ethan said, but his voice said he did. "We optimized the system. We removed unnecessary—" "You removed legally protected intellectual property safeguards," Diana stated. "Every deployment you authorized violated the IP contract on page 62. Ethan flipped frantically to page 62. There it was, Ava Mercer's name, the compliance requirements, the personal liability clause, his Uncle William's signature authorizing the original contract. "This can't be—" Ethan's voice cracked. "Nobody told me about—" "It was in every compliance email you deleted," Marcus said quietly. "Every security briefing you skipped, every warning you marked as low priority." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Ethan stood there, holding the evidence of his own destruction, surrounded by the people he'd commanded, dismissed, and ignored. His phone was still recording, though he'd forgotten about it, live streaming his frozen face to 12,000 LinkedIn followers. "The system is going to lock in 18 hours, Carl announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Without proper authentication, Phoenix goes down, everything goes down." "Then we'll get the authentication," Ethan snapped, desperation bleeding through. "Where's Ava? Get her in here and—" "You fired her," Jennifer said from the crowd. "Remember? Called her a parasite, a fossil, deadwood." "I didn't fire her. I just—" Ethan trailed off. He'd made my life hell hoping I'd quit. Everyone knew it. Everyone had watched it happen. "She's the only one who can restore the authentication," Diana said, "and she's under no legal obligation to do so. In fact, given the violations, she could sue for IP theft. Criminal charges aren't off the table." Ethan's phone slipped from his hand, clattering on the floor. Camera still rolling. Someone in the crowd gasped. Others pulled out their own phones, documenting the moment. Ethan Calloway, the disruption architect, the innovation catalyst, discovered he'd built his kingdom on someone else's land. "Fix this," Ethan said to Carl, to Diana, to anyone. "That's what we pay you for. Fix this." But Carl just placed his hand on the binder, almost gently. "We can't fix what you broke, Ethan. Only Ava can, and something tells me she's going to want more than an apology." The crowd began to disperse, but the damage was done, within minutes. Screenshots would be on Slack. Within an hour, Tech Twitter would be ablaze. The live stream was already being clipped and shared. Ethan stood alone at my old desk, still holding the binder, staring at my name on every page. The king had been shown his throne was built on sand, and the tide was coming in. The emergency board meeting convened at 6 p.m. Tuesday in the 42nd floor conference room, the one with the mahogany table and oil paintings of previous CEOs, where careers went to die. I wasn't there, of course, but Jennifer was. tucked in the corner taking minutes that would later become legend in the break room. She texted me play-by-play updates as Ethan fought for his professional life. William Calloway sat at the head of the table, no longer the proud uncle. The full board flanked him: James Morrison, Sandra Liu, Robert Damascus, Margaret Foster, people whose combined net worth could buy small countries. Diana Reed stood by the projection screen. Carl Henson sat in the witness chair. Ethan entered like he was walking to his execution, which, professionally speaking, he was. "Explain," William said. One word. Decades of disappointment compressed into 2 syllables. Ethan launched into his prepared defense, slides ready, confidence forcibly inflated. The Phoenix Project represents a paradigm shift in deployment methodology. We've achieved speeds that— "Stop," Sandra Liu interrupted. "We're not here for a pitch. We're here because our entire system is about to collapse." Diana clicked to her first slide, a simple countdown timer. 14:32:16 until system lock. "Ethan deployed proprietary code without authorization," Diana stated. "He violated IP contracts. He exposed us to litigation worth approximately—" She clicked to the next slide. $300 million in potential damages. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "That's ridiculous," Ethan protested. "I optimized inefficient code. I removed redundancies. Carl stood up, walked to the screen, and pulled up a single page. It was Clause 43C of the original contract, highlighted in yellow. Any deployment of the core architecture without authenticated approval from Ava Mercer constitutes intellectual property theft and triggers immediate system protection protocols. Carl read aloud. "This clause was approved by you, William, 3 years ago." William's face went gray. "I don't recall." "Because you trusted your leadership team to handle the details," Margaret Foster said acidly. "The same leadership team your nephew circumvented." Diana clicked again. An email chain appeared. Ethan was warned 17 times about compliance requirements. He marked every warning as spam. "Those were automated messages," Ethan pleaded. "No one reads those." "Engineers read them," Carl said quietly. "CTOs read them. People who actually understand what they're destroying read them." Robert Damascus leaned forward. "Can we just pay Mercer to fix this?" "I've reached out to her attorney," Diana said. "She's not interested in money." "Everyone's interested in money," Damascus insisted. "Not someone you publicly humiliated," Sandra Liu observed. "Not someone whose reputation you destroyed while stealing their work." The room went silent. On the screen, the timer ticked down. 14:28:43. "What does she want?" William asked. Diana pulled up a single-page document. "Her terms are specific." She read aloud. 1. Full public acknowledgement that the Phoenix system is built entirely on Ava Mercer's architecture. 2. Immediate termination of Ethan Calloway with no severance, no references, and a public statement about his IP violations. 3. Restoration of her title as chief architect with a 40% salary increase. 4. Ethan's personal LinkedIn apology video admitting to everything. "Absolutely not," Ethan exploded. "That's career suicide." "You committed career suicide when you stole her code," Margaret Foster replied coldly. James Morrison pulled up his phone. "The Phoenix failure is already trending on Reddit. Someone leaked the live stream of the confrontation. Our stock futures are down 7% in after-hours trading." "If the system locks tomorrow," Diana added, "we lose every enterprise client. The Tokuma deal becomes a lawsuit. The SEC investigates. We're looking at—" "Total collapse," William finished. He looked at Ethan, and for a moment, the uncle showed through the CEO. "How could you be so stupid?" "I was trying to innovate," Ethan's voice cracked. "Everyone said we needed to move faster, be more agile." "Not by stealing," Sandra Liu cut him off. "Not by destroying the foundation while painting the walls." Carl pulled up another document. "There's more. Ethan's optimizations created 17 critical security vulnerabilities. We're not compliant with federal regulations anymore. If auditors find out, prison, Diana said simply, for whoever signed off on the deployments. Every eye turned to Ethan. I need to make some calls, Ethan said, reaching for his phone. To whom? William asked. Your Instagram followers? Your LinkedIn network? The people you were teaching about disruption? The timer read 14:24:17. Vote, William said heavily. All in favor of accepting Mercer's terms? 5 hands rose immediately. Ethan, William said, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Diana, draft the public statement. Carl, beg Mercer to save us. What about my options? Ethan demanded. My equity? I'm owed? You're owed nothing, Margaret Foster said. Check your employment contract. IP theft voids everything. Ethan stood up, shaking. This is a witch hunt. I'll sue. You'll do nothing, William said quietly. Except hope Ava Mercer is more merciful than you were. 2 security guards appeared at the door. Ethan looked around the room one last time, at the people he'd thought were his subjects, his kingdom, his future. Uncle William, he started. Don't, William replied. Just don't. As Ethan was escorted out, Jennifer texted me. He's crying, actually crying, walking past everyone he humiliated. The timer on the screen read a 19:33. The board sat in silence, watching the seconds tick away, waiting for Carl to call me, waiting to learn if I'd saved the company that had let Ethan destroy me. They were about to learn what disruption really meant. My phone rang at 7:23 p.m. Tuesday. Carl Henson's name on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Ava, Carl's voice was carefully neutral. I assume you know why I'm calling. The timer shows 13 hours and 7 minutes, I said, looking at my laptop screen where I'd been monitoring the countdown all day. Cutting it close, aren't you? The board has accepted your terms, all of them. I smiled at my reflection in the window. Including the LinkedIn video? Ethan's already recording it. Diana's standing over him with the script you provided. The script I'd written 3 days ago, knowing this moment would come, every word crafted to ensure Ethan Calloway would never work in tech again. Send me the signed termination papers and the board resolution, I said. I'll need to verify them before I restore anything. Within 10 minutes, the documents arrived. Ethan's termination, effective immediately. For cause, the public statement acknowledging my architecture, the salary increase, actually 45%, not 40. They were scared. But the crown jewel was the video. Ethan, his eyes red and puffy, reading my words. I, Ethan Calloway, publicly apologized to Ava Mercer for stealing her intellectual property, claiming credit for her work, and damaging her professional reputation. The Phoenix system was built entirely on architecture she designed. I am resigning in disgrace, and I encourage everyone in tech to remember that innovation without ethics is just theft with better marketing. It had already been posted. The comments were pouring in. His 40,000 fake followers couldn't save him from the real ones tearing him apart. I opened my authentication portal and began the restoration process, one by one. I input the cryptographic keys, watch the system recognize its creator, watch the warnings dissolve. The timer stopped at 12:34:56. Phoenix wouldn't die, not today. At 8 a.m. Wednesday, I walked back into Blue Wave Technologies. Same building, same elevator, but everything had changed. People stared, some nodding respectfully, others looking away in shame, the ones who'd laughed along with Ethan's jokes. My new office, Ethan's old office, had already been cleared. The only thing left was a small cactus on the windowsill with a note from Jennifer. Hard to kill, impossible to ignore, reminded me of someone. Carl stopped by around noon. The Tokuma delegation wants to reconsider. They were impressed by how you protected your IP. Tell them the price went up, I said. 90 million, not 79. He grinned. Already did. They said yes. By Thursday, the tech press had picked up the story. The architect's revenge was trending. Ethan's LinkedIn had been deleted. but screenshots lived forever. Someone had made a meme of his crying face with the caption, "When you disrupt yourself." His uncle, William, resigned quietly on Friday, taking responsibility for enabling nepotism. The board appointed Sandra Liu as interim CEO. Her first act was to institute mandatory compliance training for all executives. She called it the Mercer Protocol. I found out later that Ethan had moved back to his parents' house in Connecticut. His Porsche had been repossessed. It was leased through the company. His startup dreams were dead. No VC would touch him. Last I heard, he was working at his father's real estate firm, showing condos to retirees. But the real satisfaction came 3 weeks later, when I gave a keynote at TechCrunch Disrupt. The title, Building Architectures That Defend Themselves. I stood on that stage, looking out at 1,000 faces, and said, innovation isn't about moving fast and breaking things. It's about building things so well that when someone tries to break them, they break the person instead. The applause was thunderous. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with a notification. Another recruiter, another offer, another company that suddenly understood the value of good architecture and better documentation, but I wasn't going anywhere. Blue Wave was mine now, in every way that mattered. That night, I sat in my apartment, looking at the city lights, thinking about Ethan's favorite phrase, disruption is the future. He was right about one thing. Disruption was the future. He just never imagined he'd be the one getting disrupted. The $79 million deal closed the next month. Actually, $93 million by the time we finished negotiations. The Japanese appreciated what they called structural integrity in architecture and in character. Carl asked me once if I felt guilty about what happened to Ethan. I told him the truth. He had 73 warnings. I only needed one. The cactus from Jennifer still sits on my windowsill. It's thriving, like everything else Ethan tried to kill. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't breaking someone. It's letting them break themselves against what you've built. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate revenge and poetic justice. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of how one architect's patience turned into a $79 million comeback, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed or experienced workplace karma like this? Let me know in the comments.